All right, so everyone, welcome to Archeo Viking. Today is a first for my channel. Today is a sort of debate, but really more like an education of an individual, Ben Handy, and I have my friend and fellow heathen Byron Pendleton here, sort of as essentially a moderator to make sure things don't get heated or anything like that.
I'll do my best.
Yes. There were going to be other experts, like another fellow academic and fellow heathen and friend of mine and Byron's, but both of these individuals who I wanted on happen to be going camping, which is perfectly fine. Anyways, so this has been handy, and we're going to let him sort of explain his make his point, and then we'll go into sort of some of the corrections and misconceptions.
Okay, so I made a total of 3 videos, and the first video, I admittedly that first video definitely, well, for one thing, I referred to Zeus as a Norse god. That was just like a verbal typo. But boy, people like to point out that that was wrong. My basic tenet is that the Norse religion, and for purposes I think that is very important to say, I am not referring to Norse paganism. I am referring to the religion that effectively died out about 900 years ago. And again, that might be something you're going to correct me on, but this is what I've got. There was a religion that was practiced by the Norse people, and I say that was an abusive religion, that it rewarded dying in battle. And this is my central point, I should say. So it rewarded dying in battle. And if I hear of any religion that does that, it says, oh, dying in battle is something that to be strived for, then that religion is abusive, because it is encouraging young men, and this goes on. We don't use religion to do that. We use other forms to do that currently, to get young men to believe that joining the army and such, you're a hero if you join. And I think all of that is abusive. But in this case, it was a religion that was abusive. And I think that is the case. That's my central tenet. Now, I did say some stuff that I suspect you're going to correct me on. One, and I will find it surprising if you convince me otherwise, is that the Norse religion was also designed to create a people who were xenophobic and racist and isolationist, because, and that's essentially what the stories about the ice giants were for, to create that. And I had another point, but I forgot it. Oh, well. All right. I guess I've said enough. I mean, if you've got more specific points you want to correct me on, feel free. Oh, I did say one thing. I should say, I did absolutely say that there was only 2 versions of the afterlife, which I have since learned, thanks to the thousands of comments, that I said there was Helheim and Valhalla, and well, I couldn't find reference to these hundreds of mead halls that existed other than those 2, but I found there was Freya's was there. So if you died in battle, you could either go to Freya's or Valhalla. And then the third one, if you didn't go either one, it was Helheim. Helheim was not awful, but it could be awful depending on how you lived your life. But it really was more of a reflection of how you lived your life there. And that is what my limited knowledge has led me to believe.
Okay, so, well, first off, no, we'll cover the xenophobic thing in a minute. I have a lot of things that's not at all. Okay, so for one thing, let me look. This is a book let me turn off my thing here.
Your text
background. Yeah, my background here. Whatever. Okay, so you're right here. Yeah, there you go. See, this is.
Oh, I see.
The Dictionary of Northern Mythology by a certain. See if I can get his name through here. You can't see it. It's by Rudolf Simek.
Okay.
A very good resource. He's an academic. So for one thing, no, the for one thing, there was more than frost giants. We have Surtur, who was sort of a devil-like figure. Not really. He was more just a figure of pure destruction. But multiple members of the gods were actually Jotuns. So Jotuns could be divided up into various different elemental things. You've got, like, for example, Aegir was a sea god, and so was his wife Ran. Then you had Aegir had children like Loki, not to be mistaken for Loki. There's a difference. It's a big thing that requires a whole nother video. Who was the embodiment of fire. Then you had another son of Aegir.
And sorry, I just want to back check. You're saying each of these individuals you're saying were considered gods?
Yes.
And they were
also Jotun.
Jotun, which in Jotun are the giants that are referred to.
And see,
and again, admittedly, the stories that I'm reading are not. I'm not reading these stories in any. These are stories written in Dungeons and Dragons books. These are stories written in a essentially a children's book about Norse mythology that I read when I was a kid.
Yeah, and that's.
But I want to make sure. So these are the same thing. Okay,
yeah, that's a big issue with a lot of things, and also popular culture. For one thing, Marvel would have you believe they're literal giants, when in reality they vary in height. Some are like Scothy. So Scothy, let's go to Scothy. That's an important one. So, and I'll just read you the some of the thing. Scothy, the daughter of the giant Thiazi, the wife of the god Njorthr, and the mother of Freyr, stepmother, but whatever, a goddess of hunting and skiing. According to Skald's Skrotmal, he reports, Snorri, the writer of it, reports how Scothy arms herself in order to avenge her father, Thiazi, who had been killed by Thor. When she arrives at Asgard fully armed, the gods ask her to accept compensation. She should look for a husband among the Aesir, but she will only see his feet before her choice is made.
I know this story. This was in that book that I talked about.
Yes. Scothy was a Jotun, and she became a member and a key member of the Aesir. Also, the idea, and that's just one example of it. Again, there's
so she was one of the good ones.
Yes. Well, again, let's go to another thing. So
I mean that just so we're absolutely clear. I don't want to.
Yes, she was one.
That was a charged statement on my part. She was one of the good ones. Is a statement on my part.
Well,
I don't want anyone thinking that I'm trying to play gotcha or anything like that.
No, it's fine.
But,
it's fine.
But yeah, that doesn't convince me, that story, because I do know that story, because I remember very clearly that she wanted to marry Balder, and she looked at the feet and she tried to decide which feet Balder would have. I remember that story,
and it turned out to be Njorthr. But she still. Right. But the thing is, even after that, she stayed an ally. But another thing, you have. Now we don't know of what happened. We don't know of anything about this Jotun until other than what I'm about to mention. But this Jotun, Jarnsaxa, a giantess who married Thor at some point and begot Thor's son Magni. And then also in Volspa, the sort of beginning poem of the Poetic Edda, Jarnsaxa is named among Heimdall's 9 giant mothers. And Jarnsaxa is also used as another name for Sif. So that last part, take of it what you will. I think they are separate entities or beings, but that's what you get. And then you have, for one thing, Mimir, who was a member of the Aesir, was also a Jotun. In fact, he had been a Jotun before, in the beginning. So Mimir was essentially the sort of mentor. Would you say that would be a correct way to describe Mimir, Byron? A mentor to Odin?
Yeah, it's close enough.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
so
he was a Jotun who at the beginning of time, I highly think that this comes from Greek mythology because it matches the Titan war, but supposedly in the Poetic Edda, so they're the primordial giant alongside Surtur, Ymir, went to war with Mimir, Besla, Othin, and his two brothers, Vili and Ve, who were born from the
time. I'm sorry, I have to. You're throwing a lot of names at Othin. Who is Othin?
Odin. That's the correct
okay. And I suspected as much, but I just didn't know that name.
The D is supposed to have a line through it to designate a T. Again, popular culture.
No, that's fine. I didn't know. I never heard that before. So
yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, so Othin and his brothers Vili and Ve, sometimes Honor and Lothar, depending on what source you look at, alongside Mimir and his giantess wife Besla, and maybe his father Bor, who was also a giant. We don't know. Who was also a Jotun. We don't know. Went to war with Ymir and killed him, and did the whole create the world out of his body parts. That sort of comes from Greek mythology. Again, it only shows up in the late medieval era during the writing of the Poetic Edda.
I always heard that it was like man was a tree. They were like trees that were animated or something.
Yeah, that's a common thing. That's
okay.
That's a relevant dude. Yeah. But anyways,
well, creation myths, I know they get crazy. And it basically boils down to pretty much everyone has some version of about 5 different creation myths. Everywhere in the world, which if you ever read Joseph Campbell, man, that's some great stuff.
But anyways,
you're if I can ask some questions, sorry, I know you've got volumes of information to share, and I'm sorry, but I am interested in learning this because you've said some things that make me go, well, that's a strange thing. Now here's my perception of it is there, and I for example, I remember very clearly a story that I read at one point where Thor is traveling and he comes upon a house with a man and a boy, and they don't have food, so he slaughters one of the goats and he says, "Don't break the bones." And the boy does break one of the bones, and so the goat is now lame because he's able to make the goat whole again in the morning. And then so the guy goes, "Well, why doesn't the boy travel with you?" And then they go on for a bit, and then Thor has to fight an old woman who he can't beat, and he has to I forget what he has to drink.
He has to drink a large horn, and and he has to wrestle a cat.
Is that okay? And it turns out that these were the giants, and in the story I read, this was specifically the giants who had tricked him, and the old woman was time. Oh, and the boy has to race somebody, and the
boy has how the story goes. So the story is so what it is Thor and Loki, though. It's more, if you look at some of the other context clues of other stories, it may have more originally been Tyr. And I'll get to Loki in a minute, in a little while. But essentially, Thor and Loki go on a trip to Utgard. And the only mention of this journey, not the mention of Utgard Loki, the eventual leader of the Jotuns that he gets to, but the only mention of this journey happens in the prose Edda. And Loki and Thor are on this journey there, and they do stop at Egil's house, not to be mistaken for Egil Skallagrim, who was a real historical person who, basically, if you were to watch, say Breaking Bad or The Punisher, that would be a more apt description of that Egil. This is a different Egil. Anyways, he comes across the house of Egil and his family. And yeah, you got that part right. He, slaughters the goat as a feast and such, and his son does that. But, really it was just a penance to have the boy come with him.
I remember it was until the goat's leg healed.
He stayed with Thor for the rest of his life.
Really? Wow.
Yes. In fact, in the battle with a Jotun named Hrungnir, which happened because of Odin. Well, and I'll get, like I said, I can explain that in a second. But essentially, Thialfi goes with him and sort of becomes his page, his person. That's because in Norse, in much of Northern European, not just Norse culture, it was more about restorative justice than anything. So you were to pay some sort of some sort of recompense or something like that. Say if you damaged property, you were to pay for the property you broke. Same with animals and things like that. So that's what that is, and that's what happened with that. And then I eventually got to Utgard. And at first, when Thor meets this Jotun, because they take shelter in a cave, quote unquote, that turned out to be a glove of the Jotun. And this Jotun whose name is Skrinir, and they like, hey, can you take us to Utgard? And he's like, yeah, sure. And they walk with him pretty much, without any issue. The only time Thor tries to do anything is when they camp for the night and Skrinir starts snoring incredibly loudly, and Thor gets annoyed. He tries to sort of hit Skrinir with Mjolnir to get him to shut up. And nothing happens. When he does, Skrinir just opens his eyes and is like, hey, did a branch fall on me? And Thor's like,
that's right.
All right, that's interesting.
And that was Skrinir was actually a mountain, right?
Yeah. And things like that. And so they eventually get to Utgard and they do all these things. And it's really just contests to show who's better at stuff.
Right. And the giants tricked him.
Yeah. Well,
and so he ended up fighting things that they ended up being impossible tasks. And that's kind of the root of that. That's a pretty good example. Now let me stress. I am vaguely familiar with Joseph Campbell's writings, and so I don't know if you're aware. Joseph Campbell was Joseph Campbell is he's dead now, but he was a professor of comparative religion. And he wrote Hero with a Thousand Faces, and I recommend it highly.
Wasn't he the one who came up with the hero's journey as well?
Yes. He did. Well, other people have had their own hero's journey, but I think he probably was the first one who went, look, all of them, and now other people have gone, well, they don't like his hero's journey, so they write their own. Yeah. But yeah, he kind of started that concept. Very good.
Okay. Yes.
So my basis here is to say, when you untangle the stories of now, and I should stress, religion comes in layers. Okay. Judaism is the best example for this because they stratify these layers so well, because you've got the Torah, which most people who live in the West are familiar with the Torah because it's pretty much the same as what the Christians call the Old Testament. But I mean, it's clearly modified from that. But then you've got the Talmud, which is just oral traditions and wise. The people literally sitting around having conversations. The rabbis
rabbinical commentary,
and then they record it and stuff, and so that the Talmud goes and it sits on top of the Torah as a thing, and then the next layer would be the practices of the faith. And it is my contention that all of that stuff comes together in an effort to create a society. And so the stories in and of themselves, and I say, okay, when I look at these stories and when I read them, and these are great stories. As a storyteller, as a writer, I love the Norse stories. As a guy who plays Dungeons and Dragons, I love the Norse stories. But, and Norse paganism has really just, the whole pagan movement has really gone and sort of looked at religion as a whole and gone, let's throw away the garbage and keep all the great parts.
I see. That's a point of contention I'm gonna have to come back to a little bit, because it's a high misconception. It's not your fault. You're not bad for thinking that. I want to make that clear. It's just Byron and I, we have some things to tell you that not a lot of people know because they're not in the community. Again, not on you, not on anybody who doesn't know. I just want to make sure that that's a misconception, and we'll get on that later on. That's sort of one of the last points I want to cover.
Okay.
but yeah, that's one of the misconceptions that you have, and again, that's not on you. That's a misconception that's still even going on in heathenry about Norse paganism specifically. That we have, that Byron and I have opinions on, to say the least. Anyways, okay, but yes. So you had, so that's the thing, and it's important to remember most of the stories of the Jotuns that are, I don't want to say bad because we have examples of Jotuns that before the Viking Age, because it's important that Norse heathenry is a microcosm of overall heathenry of the Germanic culture, which was very connected. And for one thing, there are various regional differences. So, but it's important to note that, like, from the onset, for example, in Volspa talking about Odin's war with Ymir, it's stated very clearly that Odin and his brothers, his father Bor, Mimir, and Bestla were all Jotuns also. There was no real distinction. They were one and the same. In fact, Thor's mother, Yorth, or Yorth, is a Jotun named, who's essentially the embodiment of Mother Earth. I mean, in fact, her name is where we get the term Earth from, etymologically. And things like that. And then he marries at some point Jotuns, at least one Jotun, and has his son Magni, and things like that. And then Freyr marries a Jotun named Gertha, where he sends his own sword to her father as sort of a bride price. Essentially, he sits on Odin's throne in the Poetic Edda and sees her at a distance, because Odin supposedly can see all of the universe by sitting on his throne, and he sees her and she's so beautiful he wants to marry her, so he sends a bride price of his sword. I mean, there's a little more in between the story. He sends an emissary to her. It's essentially a negotiation between Freyr and Gertha's father, and he eventually sends his own sword to this Jotun as a bride price to marry Gertha. And supposedly, according to the sagas that we have, it was a happy marriage. They both loved each other. So that's, one thing. But that shows, they weren't enemies always. In fact, most of the time we have examples like with Skathi and with Gertha and with Aegir, that they traded with, they talked with, they lived with, etc., married these Jotuns regularly. In fact, at the funeral of Balder, the ship is so heavy to push that the only two individuals who can push the ship, the burial ship of Balder, are Thor and another giantess, a Jotuness named Hyrroken, who rides a wolf with the reins of a serpent. Like the reins are made out of serpents, which I think would be cool to see in movies. But anyways, but so, like, they're at the funeral of Balder, showing that there's not a big distinction. Not to mention, in one journey to fight a giant, I hate using the term giant, a Jotun named Geirrod. Sorry, he's on his way. Thor's on his way because he's been told by Loki that supposedly Geirrod wants him, like, to visit and have a feast at his hall, but really it's a plan to kill Thor. And so Thor has left Mjolnir, his girdle of strength, which is the belt that gives him the strength to lift Mjolnir, and his iron gloves, which allow him to touch Mjolnir. And so he's left all that behind, and he stays the night on the way in the home of a giantess, of a Jotuness named Grid. And Grid says, hey, Geirrod's a bad person. He's going to try and kill you. Take my iron staff, my iron gloves, my belt of strength, and my shield. And then later on, after he's defeated Geirrod, Odin goes on and at least marries Grid, or sleeps with her, and they give birth to the deity Vali. And that pattern continues on and on, where Jotuns and deities intermix. And then the biggest contention, other than the archaeological evidence, but the biggest contention about the xenophobia thing is the Vanir. The Vanir, the other set of deities, Njordur, Freyr, and Freya, and also maybe Nerthus. That's a big thing. There was at one point a war between these sort of pantheons that ended sort of in a stalemate, and so they exchanged hostages and said, "Okay, we're going to end the war." With Mimir and Hoenir going to the Vanir, and Freyr, Njorthr, and Freya coming to the Aesir, and where they would intermarry with other deities and things like that. And Freyr was actually one of the most important deities in the ancient Norse religion. In fact, Adam of Bremen mentions in his account of the bishops of Scandinavia or something like that. Sorry, bishops of Hamburg. The bishops of Hamburg. He mentions that at the Temple of Uppsala, Sweden, there are 3 deities who have god posts or statues or what have you there, and the 3 deities are Thor, Odin, and Freyr. So again, the xenophobia doesn't fit, accepting not a foreign deity in as one of your most important deities. Not to mention that the Norse accepted Christianity for foreign religions with open arms. Furthermore, we have, let me find that here. So furthermore, we have Islamic coins found in Anglo-Saxon England and in Scandinavia that you see right here, as well as, over here, yeah, there we go. Let's see if this is the one I have. No, not the one I have. I have a lot here.
No, that's good. It's good stuff.
One thing to keep in mind is the Aesir were pretty much a offshoot of the Jotun, because almost all the Aesir have Jotun ancestry.
Yes,
so they're pretty much
well, I will definitely concede that point that I did.
Yes.
That. Now, I will say though that is odd, because I guess there were plenty of them, because the Vikings were basically coastal raiders who depended on
traders. And traders.
They would trade, but and I would say that the longboat is clearly the longboat, which is an outstanding design. As far as being coastal sailors, I would say that that whole region, the only possible coastal sailors that you could say through history were on par with them, maybe, were the Japanese, who were also outstanding coastal sailors.
The Muslim kingdoms too. That's also the Malaysian sailors. That's a big thing that's a lot of people don't really know about, is that
I definitely don't know anything about the Malaysian sailors.
The Indo-Malaysian sailors were among the best. In fact, the Malaysian sailors, because the Malaysian ethnicity actually comes from southern China, because ethnic groups and borders are never where they always were.
No.
And they sort of disseminated south. Okay, 13. Yeah. So, and actually, the Norse traded actually quite.
Yes, but you got to admit, a longship is designed. If you just look at the longship, that is not designed for trading. That is designed for coastal raiding.
But they had other ships.
You get what you want, you get out.
Yeah, they had other ships. They had Nars, which are the sort of cargo ships that they would do these things. So first of all, they would trade in the Volga region with these Eurasian steppe nomads called the Khazars and the Bulgars, where they would go down to them to trade and find what they would trade here.
No, we don't need to get into that.
No. But
no. You don't need to prove. I'm accepting.
I know. But I'm just saying that the thing is, like, living in, for example, in the American South, where xenophobia and racism, and also in the Midwest, but it's been so long since I've been to the Midwest. In the American South, where xenophobia and racism is heavily prevalent, it's important to note that you don't, with the exception of like minor cultural appropriation of indigenous cultures, of indigenous American culture, they did not adopt any other cultures, and that's sort of the thing here. So, for example, the Norse would trade with the Muslim kingdoms things like swords, which they actually craved, whereas in return they would get things like silk and other things like that, other Islamic coins and things like that. And yeah, there we go. Stop in over there. So, and for example, so this is a paper. It's a very interesting paper titled "With Asia as as a neighbor: the archaeological evidence of contacts between Scandinavia, Central Asia, and the Tang Dynasty, China." Now, I want to make this very clear to anyone watching, and Byron and Ben. No, the Norse did not make it to China. That's too far.
I'm aware. No, we're fine.
I'm just making that clear because some people who like to watch, for example, Graham doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Hancock like to make these broad connections.
No, I don't even know who that is.
You're lucky. You're lucky. But anyways, so for example, they would go to contact with Byzantium for various things. They called it Miklagard. Let me find that. They called it Miklagard, and they would go and they would trade for a variety of things. But they would also go and trade with, at least based off of this archaeological evidence, they would go. So, for example, they would go to Byzantium for glass, amethyst beads, ivory rings, and things like that. But they would also go. Also, this Tang Dynasty silk found from Birka, and where they would go for this would be the Samanid realm, which is essentially in modern-day Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and I want to say Tajikistan. I know Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan for sure, which was in the Samanid realm was a powerful Muslim empire that broke off from the Abbasid Caliphate. So, brief little division of Muslim history is that first there was the Rashidun Caliphate and then the Umayyad Caliphate. The Rashidun Caliphate was the caliphate that sort of rose alongside Muhammad and conquered Iraq and said.
I'm trying to be mindful of your audience, essentially, because I think you're getting a little.
No, yeah, that's true. But the Samanid realm is well. I'll get there. They broke, so they came out there, and then the Umayyad Caliphate was the first that sort of expanded in all directions, and then it broke up and was replaced by the Abbasid Caliphate, and the Abbasid Caliphate existed until 1258, but was really just a division of several different separate kingdoms, with Baghdad being the capital. And the Samanid realm was one of the most powerful. And so what they did is they were sort of a middleman for East Asia and Europe, and also the Middle East. And so the Norse would go and especially the Rus, the Kievan Rus would go and they would trade for a variety of things. One, we have the Buddha in Helgo, Sweden. This is the actual artifact from the burial in Helgo, Sweden. It's very clearly a Buddha. As well as one from Oxford. Yes.
That my wife is Buddhist. I would like.
Yes. Yes. So yes.
I'm looking for somewhere where I can record that, so I can look it up later. And show her. You know what? You have can you just send me?
Yeah, I'll send you
something about that.
Yeah, I'll send you the paper.
I would like my wife to see that. All right, so let's step away from xenophobia, because honestly, you know what, that you've made an outstanding case for that. Now I'm gonna talk, and actually while you were talking, I was committing a grievous sin as a Quaker, in that I was starting to think about something I wanted to say instead of listening, and I apologize for that. But something occurred to me, and it could be a flaw on my own, because all right, so let's get to Vikings for a moment. and let me just talk, because here's the root of the thing. Now, a Viking, and my source for much of this is actually writings and stories from the victims of Vikings. Okay, so I thought about it, and I was like, as you were saying all this, I was like, well, I am working on the assumption, because these people, of course, thought of if you were in fear of Vikings attacking you, then you would have very little perception. So I'll agree that, yeah, that's probably a misconception that I picked up, because I tended to get my version of Vikings from people who only saw Vikings as coastal raiders.
Yeah, well, and that's not a bad thing, but it's also important to note many of these accounts of them being bad were actually from other Viking sources, from other Norse sources. For example, this is something I want to bring up. You mentioned the Berserkers in one of your video. Again, some of the things you mentioned were common misconceptions that are still being talked about today. So, and I'll get to the Berserkers being drug-addled in a second. That's something that academics are trying to move away from based off of evidence. But actually, they actually were not really liked by most Norse, by most Scandinavian society. In fact, so much so that it doesn't say here, but it was around. It doesn't say here, but I know for a fact it was 1015 CE, AD, however you want to measure it. That Jarl Eric, the son of Hakon, one of the kings of Norway, abolished all holmgang, which was judicial duels. Basically, you impugn my honor, pistols at dawn kind of scenario. Only swords. Okay. Yeah. Anyway,
right.
And declared all robbers and berserkers who disturb the peace outlaws. So, and that's one of the things you get from sources, is that generally the berserkers were not liked. They served a purpose, and that was, if you're going to war with an enemy, you want somebody who is willing to put their lives on the line with no fear. But at the same time, you had other societies who were sort of berserker-like, but not quite, like the Jomsvikings, Vikings, who were essentially, I hate this comparison because it's not accurate, because knightly orders existed before then, but they were sort of a proto-knightly order, similar to the Knights Templar. Sort of. Again,
the Berserkers were, or
no,
the
the Berserkers too, but the Jomsvikings, because the Berserkers were sort of a military unit, and I'll get to that in a second. But the Jomsvikings are a better comparison of what.
Well, let's hang on to the Berserkers for a moment, because I'm curious about that, because you're saying I've been given the wrong information on that. I wrote a screenplay called Berserker once that I mean, I'm not going to go back and rewrite the screenplay on this, because it had nothing to do with Berserkers.
There's no point.
It was just no, it was literally a science fiction thing named Berserker. After that, doesn't matter. But sorry, I'm a little out of it. We had an event in the park today. I was giving out school supplies to kids, and it was the sun, so I got some sunburn. I'm not good with sun.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah.
All right. So, where was I? Berserkers. Yes. Okay. So you're saying that they were a unit, like, but there were people. So, like, I'm trying to think of a good example. Let's go to Alexander's army. Okay. For comparison.
Okay.
In Alexander's army, you would have like light spearmen, heavy infantry, all those sorts of things. Okay. So where was it? It might be in Beowulf. There is a writing, and I very remember clearly reading it, though I'm not sure where it is. And they're in the longboat going along, and the berserker feels the rage come upon him, and they have to stop the boat so he can go out and fight with a tree until he calms down enough that they can move on.
Well, yeah, there are some stories like that, but generally their berserkers are, for example, in I don't have it with me, but in the saga of the Air Dwellers, Erebega saga, there's an individual who sort of hires berserkers to help him with something as mercenaries, like sort of help him take out a neighbor, and then they refuse to leave. They essentially are like, no, we're going to stay as long as we want because you're paying us. And he eventually has to sort of lock them in his basement and set it on fire. And then the one who gets out, he kills. Things like that. So most of the sagas describe them as mercenaries. And so one of the misconceptions people have about the berserkers, thanks to a lot of media, including more recent modern media like the anime and manga Vinland Saga is the idea that they would eat mushrooms or something like that to intoxicate themselves and essentially feel no pain and rage themselves. There's no evidence that they used mushrooms. Now, there has been this academic paper we have right here called The Sagas of Solonici, Speculative Ethno-Botanical Perspectives on the Norse Berserkers. And I'm not going to read the whole paper, but I'll read the abstract and the conclusion, where essentially they state that the plant, what is it? I don't know. H. Niger was H. Niger was a more likely intoxicant than Amanita muscaria, which is the mushroom theory. And the conclusion essentially, as I skip through all the results, the conclusion essentially says the present article has provided a theory that Hyo Siskimus Niger was used by the famed Berserker warriors of the saga period in Scandinavia to produce battle trances. Ultimately, future finds will determine this theory, and then it just goes on into a thing, and it says it's better than Amanita muscaria because it contains these alkaloids. However, despite what this paper says, an individual known as Roderick Dale, for his master's thesis, talked about this as well, and essentially he describes the Berserker Rage as sort of more like the haka dance of the Maori, more like a dance to intimidate your enemies. So they would do this dance, biting their shields, yelling, beating, punching each other, acting like they were unbeatable in order to...
So, like, if you were a berserker, what basically, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. That is a much. Yeah.
They find the conclusion so I can more accurately say.
I've always had a problem with. I mean, I accepted what it was, but I kind of was like, it seems stupid that somebody would get drugged up to go fight. I mean, that's the last thing you want to do if you're going to fight to the death. But okay, so I that fits better into a reality. I'll concede that point fully. Let me ask you a question though. If I were a berserker, would my child be like, was it a status?
No.
Or was it like, so you would just choose to take on this life and so being a berserker, you would go into the battle rage, you'd scream a lot, you'd make a lot of noise, you'd scare
you would
a big part of it.
You would essentially enter an order, because so we have examples of three different kinds of berserkers. We have the Berserkers, which where we get the term, where they wore bear pelts. Then we have the Ulfthenar.
Really? That's awesome. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it means bear skirt. And then you have the Ulfthenar, which was mentioned at least once as the sort of elite guard of Harold Fairhair. Harold Finehair is sometimes how he's pronounced, but I've heard both. When in his conquest, his unification of Norway, because the story goes, just to explain, he wanted to marry a woman, and she said that she wouldn't marry him until he was king of all Norway. And so he's like, okay, well, I guess I'm never gonna comb my hair until I'm done conquering. And then of course he conquers, and where the fine hair comes from. By the time he got done and he fixed up his hair, apparently it was so beautiful he got the term fine hair. But anyways, so during his conquest of Norway, he had a group of elite soldiers known as the Ulfthenar, who wore wolf pelts and were his best warriors. And then you have...
and these would be berserkers as well? Or is this just another... Okay.
They would be berserkers as well. And then you also have another group who would wear boar helmets. Or boar pelts. That's why, for example, Beowulf is described as having a boar on his helmet. And he, and several times in this story, he fights stark naked, which is like what they hear, is it talks about how the Berserker were either dangerously psychologically imbalanced, or they were just violently aggressive young men. They fought in a frenzy inspired by drugs or alcohol, or they did not. The description given by Snorri is readily recognizable in the works and interpretations largely derived from his description of Berserksganger and Ynglinga Saga. Some care needs to be taken here because it appears that many authors of general histories have relied too much on this. And essentially, goes on to describe how it was more a haka dance. It was more an intimidation dance.
No. That's there. I suspect that's honestly, the reality is it was both.
Well, and again, that's why this.
I mean, like this guy would, the fact is,
it's just a pin. It really,
if they had something, they probably drank a bit much.
Well, yes, but everyone did. That was, again, there's, so to go back to the Jans Vikings, the Jans Vikings were sort of like this. They were essentially Berserkers would have been mercenary orders, warrior orders where you would enter.
Well, I definitely will concede that based on what you've taught me, that I had my perception of Berserkers was absolutely incorrect.
Yes.
Now,
and drinking is not out of the question, though. I will concede that, and that's because in the Jans Viking saga, they drink. The Jans Vikings, who are a mercenary group, they drink heavily, and then in their drunkenness, they all decide we're going to invade Sweden.
Now,
and then it ends horribly. So
now.
Yeah,
I should say, because we're moving along and we're getting stuff, and I'm loving this education. But, and I'm sorry again, I feel like I'm not at my best. I should have planned this for another day. I forgot we had this event today. Oh yes. All right. So I would like to talk about Valhalla.
Yes. That.
And if you had plans, I feel like I'm derailing you,
no,
but at the same time, you're
go.
going deep into a lot of things that
this is the next place I was actually going to go, so you're good. Yeah.
Okay, so my central premise and is that for a religion to reward people dying in combat is in the way, as I said, religions are designed by the powerful over time to mold a society to serve the powerful. Now, this, like, I'm a Quaker, okay?
Yeah.
And if you look at the Quaker history, it was designed by some very rich people to build a society that was based on peacefulness, equality, spirituality, simplicity, and things like that. And if you look at the history of Quakerism, that was it. But it was very clear that the religion that I follow was designed to create that society. So I would say a religion that rewards young men dying in battle was designed by the powerful to encourage young men to die in battle, to encourage them to serve their masters in the way that their masters wanted. And that is the premise, the central premise. That is why I say that Norse faith that existed then was an abusive religion.
Okay, and see that, and that's
actually a lot of contemporary theories that actually say that Valhalla was the consolation prize because they couldn't be taken home to their burial mount, their family burial mounds.
Yeah.
So a lot of people today think it was more of a consolation prize than an actual reward.
Yes, so for one thing, we'll get, first things first, let's get to the Valkyrie, because, the most common perception of Valhalla, because that's the correct pronunciation, not your fault, again, that's a common misconception, is that, let's see here, 8, let's see here, find it, okay, yeah, there, is that, when you die in battle, you're picked by the Valkyrie, and you're taken to Valhalla, where you can die and become one of the Einherjar, the warriors who fight for Odin. In Ragnarok, which one thing, Ragnarok is most likely a Christian creation because it does not, with the exception of the Heyland and a poem called Muspeli, which are Christian poems written in roughly 1000 CE Saxony and Germany, the Heyland specifically being written to convert people by making the gospel of Jesus Christ into a more of a Norse Germanic-like saga.
Oh yeah, no.
So they mentioned the Muspeli coming and starting Ragnarok, and then other than that, we don't see it again at all until 200 to 300 years later in Iceland, when the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda are being written by Christian monks. So let's go ahead and throw that idea that Ragnarok was a Norse pagan Germanic heathen idea out. Most people don't, most heathens and most academics don't actually think that was originally a heathen thing. And one thing that sort of backs us up, another thing to mention, the Valkyrie, they were not actually wanted to show up, or at least that's what we get from the sagas. So what we have here is page 348 and 349 of Njál's saga, also known as Burnt Njál's saga, because the main character in the story, spoiler, gets burnt in his house. Anyways, so this an individual named Thorstein, who was like one of the survivors, or was it Thorstein? Whatever, it doesn't matter. That's not the point. Anyways, an individual during a battle, he comes across a house. Ow. And he looks into the house and he sees these individuals, these 12 women inside, and weaving, and he could see a woman with a loom set up before them. Men's heads were used in the place of weights, men's intestines for the weft and warp. A sword served as the beater, and the shuttle was an arrow. And these were the verses they were chanting. Blood rains from the cloudy web. On broad loom of slaughter, the web of man, gray as armor, is now being woven. The Valkyries will cross it with crimson weft. The warp is made of human entrails, human heads, and human heads are used as the weights. The heddle rods are blood-wet spears. The shafts are iron-bound, and the arrows are the shuttles. With the swords we will weave the web of battle. The Valkyries go weaving with drawn swords. Hild and Hjorthrumal, and he goes through all these names. Spears will shatter, shields will splinter, swords will gnaw, like wolves through armor. And it just goes on and on.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially the individual looking in, he's like, what the fuck am I seeing? And he's in fear. Furthermore, we look at the
so this was this was essentially the Valkyries would come and take the bodies and then use the weapons, armor, and body parts of the fallen in their weaving.
Essentially. And also they would take them to Valhalla, and I'll get to that in a second, because that's the next thing of the show. But that's so, and then when we look at the Anglo-Saxon equivalent of the Valkyrie, it's more etymologically connected to the Furies of Greek and Roman mythology.
Yeah, the weaving was interesting, but
yeah, they were essentially demons or battlefield spirits that Odin or whatever war deity was in control of them had to control them, or they would go and cause sheer destruction. Well, so no, you would not want to be taken by the Valkyrie. Okay. Then we get to the Valhalla thing. So for one thing, we have the tale of the afterlife in the Gesta Danorum by Saxo Grammaticus, who was a contemporary of Snorri in the 1200s, and he talks about a man named Hadding, also known as Haddingus, depending on the translation you read, who went on a journey to the afterlife, and he meets a woman in his journey. And then they talk about how they came across a bridge, and it says when they crossed this bridge, they beheld two armies encountering one another with might and main. When having inquired the woman about their estate,
You're getting weird. Your sound, your audio. Is it me or?
It might be.
No, I hear it too.
There's
it sounds almost like an
tinny.
Echo.
Yeah, there's like a tinny echo kind of going on.
Hang on. How's that? Better? Or...
No, still the same.
Hang on. Fix this. Hold on, let me fix the sound here.
I mean, it's not critical, but since you're recording it, I figured you'd want to.
See here. I don't know if it's gonna fix it. Anyways, so we'll cross that bridge in a second.
Okay.
Anyways, when see here, and when having inquired the woman about their estate, these, she said, are they who have been slain by the sword, declaring the manner of their death by a continual rehearsal, and enact the deeds of their past life in a living spectacle. Then a wall hard to approach and climb blocked their further advance. The woman tried to leap it, but in vain, being unable to do so with her slender, wrinkled body. Then she wrung off the head of a rooster, which she chanced to be taking down with her, flung it beyond the barrier of the walls. Forthwith the bird came back to life and testified by a loud crow to the recovery of breathing. So it talks about there is this spot where people are fighting and killing each other in an afterlife.
Ow.
But it's more seen as like they're in limbo, because beyond it is this place where you can go, and if you die, be reborn. Furthermore, they talk about they as they pass, they at last approach sunny regions, which produce the herbs the woman had brought away. So it talks about adjacent to this war-torn region is a sunny region that is good as well, alongside the afterlife that they couldn't go into, but they know after they killed the chicken and threw it above the walls that it was brought back to life, and that if you go there, you'll be brought back to life. So we have more indication that no, Valhalla was not a place that was accepted. Furthermore, let me find the poetic.
So it was no.
And then we have this thing from the Poetic Edda called the Way of Harbard, where essentially Thor comes across a ferryman named Harbard, who is actually Odin in disguise, because Odin likes to do like 12D chess and manipulate people because he's a shapeshifter. And there's a comment that Odin, as this ferryman, makes where he says, "Moors I raised, princes I anger, and peace brought never. The noble who fall in battle, who fall in the fight have Odin. Odin takes the ones who fall in battle, and Thor has the race of thralls. Thor has the common folk." Now, this is a throwaway line. It's only mentioned in this, the idea that Thor takes people into his afterlife is only mentioned in this saga, but it's still a mention, and it mentions that he takes the common people. So again, there's multiple different afterlives, and really only the people who die in battle go to Valhalla, and really, again, only people who are picked by the Valkyrie. Because if we go back to Njál's saga, to chapter 77, unfortunately, sometimes this doesn't load correctly. So,
archive.org is a pain in the butt like that.
Yes. Let's see here. 170. That's right. I know where it is now. Yeah, there we go. So we'll go and skip over to a whole bunch of pages rather than having to find it again. I'll just skip it, and that way I know exactly where I'm going. Mm-hmm.
Well, while he's looking for that, one thing I keep in mind is that all these sources we do have, we're getting from filtered through from Snorri, who was a Christian monk.
Yeah.
And
right. I've heard of Snorri, and I know that there are.
So a lot of it is filtered through a Christian
lens,
worldview, perception lens. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to keep that in mind as well, and ask: did the Norse actually believe this, Or is this just something Snorri's telling us to make Christianity look better and to make the Norse look bad?
Also, the Snorri likes to do, like, Snorri and Saxo Grammaticus also, they like to make the gods mortals or descended from mortals. Like, Snorri has this whole thing where supposedly the gods were descended from people who survived the Trojan War. so yeah, take what Snorri says in the grand part. But anyways, but other than these afterlives, we also have hints that people would live on in burial mounds as well, rather than just in their.
Let me before you go on in that, because that is I had a question on there. Now, did the Norse have a concept now? Because that is not a universal thing throughout faiths across the world. Is the concept of a soul?
Yeah. Oh, they had a multi-part soul. A good source for this is The Road to Hell by Hilda Roderick Ellis. Important to note that she wrote this in the 40s. In some academic papers, for example, this paper, There and Back Again, talking about the Norse Afterlife, was written more recently in 2018 and things like that. But this is still a good source.
All right, so they had a concept of the body and the soul. That's really because a more common non-Abrahamic belief ties in the idea of, or I should say, in a lot of, basically non-Abrahamic, is to tie in the idea that the what is done with the body. I mean, Egyptian is the prime example of that. What's done with the body is what really determines the afterlife. And so, whereas the Abrahamic faiths, of course, fully believe that the body is completely separate, and Buddhists have a whole other thing going.
Yeah, they have the various hells and afterlives and things like that. So yeah,
for the Germanic peoples, the body was actually part of the soul, but the soul had several different parts to it. Each part had a individual function, and the body was actually one of the parts of the soul.
Yes, and also they did, taking care of what the body did was something, what you did to the body with the afterlife was important too. For example, you would oftentimes provide shoes for the deceased, because the road to hell, hence the name of Hilda Davis's book, was seen as rocky and treacherous. But once you got there, you were in a great spot. For example, in the Poetic Edda, after Balder dies, Odin goes to hell to check on his son, and Balder is in a high seat. He's being treated with all due respect and things like that. So,
so you're saying hell? Are you referring to Helheim?
It was more originally called Hell. H-E-L.
H-E-L. Okay,
yeah.
So but it is. You are not referring.
The Christians actually stole the word hell.
Yeah, it was originally Gehenna.
Just like they stole the Greek Hades.
Yeah.
But before the Christians, it was the underworld, and it was not all dark and evil and bad.
Yeah.
Before the Christian influence came in.
No, yeah,
but
I know that not everybody had to push a rock up a hill forever.
No.
And even if you did, what's so bad about having to push a rock up a hill?
Well, that was punishment, because that was in Tartarus, because there was also Elysium. But anyways, which is interesting, when people see like Disney Hercules, anyways, because they don't get that. But anyways, so we have these little excerpts of people who lived on in their burial mounds. And so one of the main protagonists of Njal Saga is a man named Gunnar, who was like the greatest warrior in Iceland, and he has a halberd that is undefeated, or an axe, probably more like a Dane axe, because halberds came way later, but that's the word used. He has an axe that's undefeated, and all this other stuff. And his companion was this big, massive dog that is infinitely loyal and can take out any opponent for him. But eventually, like many Norse heroes, he is finally defeated. Essentially, people gang up on him and kill him after a whole bunch of them were already killed in the process. And so after his death, his good friend Y'all and their various family members talk about his burial, and in it they say that after his burial, it's like, we heard from the south how Gunnar, warrior of many seas, passionate in battle, wielded his might. Oh, wrong person. Wrong one. There we go. Sorry. We hear the 78. We hear say that Hogni's generous father, rich in daring exploits, who lavishly gave in battle, distributing wounds in his helmets, could be heard far away from his grave. Essentially, he chanted a verse so loudly they could hear it clearly from much farther away, and they could see Gunnar was happy, and he chanted this verse, that you see right here. So we have examples in sagas of individuals living on in their burial mounds. In fact, we have a saga of Aaron and Asmund, where supposedly these two warriors who are good friends, there's a lot of subtext to this. Anyways, one of them dies, and the agreement was that I forget which one it was, whether it was Aaron or Asmund. But anyway, the point was one of the friends dies, and the other friend is honor bound to stay 3 nights in the burial mound with him. And in this time, his friend apparently turns into what's known as a Draugr, which is sort of a vampire, sort of a zombie, etc. And he eventually has to set his friend on fire and escape. Which is why you have examples of, in burial mounds, doors walled in, and to keep Draugr from escaping their burial mounds. Because essentially, Draugr were what would happen if an incredibly horrible person died.
Why do I know that word, Draugr?
And played Skyrim?
Yes, that's it. That's where it's from.
Yes,
I mean, that's not where it's from, but that's where I know it from.
Yes,
Okay. So Skyrim took that word. Okay.
Yeah. So essentially, most Norse sagas, Draugr were corrupt individuals who died, or evil individuals who died, and then came back to life. It would only happen to evil individuals. A little bit if you were like bitten or had a Draugr, turn you into one, into a Draugr also. Sort of like, again, the vampire thing, but generally it was only evil people. So this is where we get the biggest indications to a lot of academics that generally Draugr was what would happen to evil individuals. There was no real concept of a permanent hell, hell in the Christian sense. Even a part of hell, of the Norse hell called Nostron, may have been. It's described as being a river of serpents and venom, where wolves bite you infinitely, and serpents strip venom on you until you're eventually devoured by a dragon. The thing with that is that again comes from the Poetic and Prose Edda, which were post-Christian sources. If it was something like that, it may have been more like how Gehenna, the Christian hell, originally was, where it was you would stay there for a certain amount of time until you were purified of your sins. Or like the Buddhist hells, where you would go, until, for the most part, until you either be, repentant and were purified by your sins. I know it's more complicated than that. I know Buddhism very well. I'm for the sake of time, making it more simple.
Now,
so this is where the concept, the misconception comes from, and so you see. Most of the sources actually point to the Valkyrie and Valhalla being a place that you do not want to be around. And you either want to stay in your burial mound, or you want to go to hell, or one of the other halls, like, for example, Thor's hall, where he takes in the thralls. Also, you had Aegir and Ron, who could, if you died at sea, they would take you into their hall. There's some debate about whether or not that was good, because it was often more in context of shipwrecks, where Ron, the sea goddess, causes your ship to wreck, and she takes them in her metaphorical net, is what the texts say, and then bring them to her hall. But the hall, is also accompanied by descriptions of Aegir being a generous host, and you have feasts there and things like that. So again, you have these various other indicators that Valhalla. Either the punishment was you were reborn as a monster, a Draugr, or you were sent to Valhalla where you were in limbo, constantly fighting and never finding peace.
All right, so it wasn't, and yeah, it seems like, all right, that seems, I can concede that point too. That makes sense. So, yeah, I definitely had a lot of misconceptions about it at a core level. Really, surprisingly, I am surprised at how much I've gotten wrong. I do think that you guys who do this, you need to make more of an outcry against pop culture. That is,
we try to, but
well, admittedly, I'll make a video with a true apology, and make sure you send me when you're. I will hold off on doing anything until you are ready to post this, so that we can
be posted tonight or tomorrow. That reminds me of the last point I want to make.
Oh yeah, go.
Point that is a misconception. Again, not your fault. So your point about them, being a toxic religion, that you've already now conceded was wrong, but I want to, expand on that. Actually, I would think the opposite is true. Modern Norse paganism is much more toxic. Modern heathenry overall, unfortunately, as a heathen myself, and Byron will agree to this, is much more toxic.
Yeah.
Back then. So we have, for example, Byron and I are Anglo-Saxon heathen, and I'm also Frankish heathen. I combine both. And in Anglo-Saxon and Frankish heathenry, as well as continental Saxon heathenry, you have these individuals known as theodes, or who practice theodism. So theodism is...
Sorry, I just want to get a clarification point. Heathen versus pagan. Is there a difference?
No, there's no difference.
Okay.
No
just
pagan. Heathen is pretty much a subset of pagan. Pagan is generally based upon the old religions of Europe.
Yeah.
Whereas heathenry is specifically the Germanic tribes.
Yeah.
It's based upon the pre-Christian Germanic tribes, which is the Norse, the Anglo-Saxons, the Franks,
the Goths,
Old Saxons, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So yes. And so with Anglo-Saxon and Frankish heathenry and continental Saxon heathenry, you have these groups who practice what is called theodism. They're called theodes. And essentially, theodism is you want to practice like you are in the Middle Ages. So you have strict class divisions. You have lords, a king, you have lords, and you have thralls and serfs and things like that. And you're supposed to be oath-bound to listen, to the point where if your lord calls you at 4 a.m. and tells you he wants you to do something, you're supposed to do it. And it's incredibly toxic. It involves things like banishment for any minor reason. They do things like they practice what's called weregild, where it's a bad representation of what weregild actually was. Where any kind of you're supposed to provide compensation or recompense or any kind of thing like that for any kind of weregild, any kind of issues you cause in the community, and if not, you're exiled. When weregild originally in history was essentially you kill somebody and you provide money to the wife, brother, family member, whatever, and a predetermined amount to compensate the family for the loss of their family member. That's it. It was specifically involved with, if you kill somebody, you go to the thing or the sort of castle gathering, and they tell you, okay, well, you are legally required to pay this set amount to the family member or to the wife or what have you to compensate them for the loss of their family member. So there's that. So theodism is one example of that. And then we have folkism. So folkism in Norse heathenry specifically, specifically also true, Byron, you put in the comments, theodism is essentially practices ritual slavery, to clarify. Anyways, but folkism essentially is the idea that you can't practice heathenry or Norse paganism or whatever unless you have Northern European ancestry. they're incredibly racist. They use Nazi symbols. They use runes in racist contexts. Like there's a thing called the winged Othala, which is a bastardization of a rune called Othala that was only used by the Nazis. In fact, I don't know if you saw the picture of the stage of CPAC from 2021, I want to say.
No, I definitely didn't.
Look it up. Look it up. That's a Nazi symbol.
Yeah, they actually.
I mean, I'm not surprised.
No,
I mean, they've. I don't know, something must have happened in like 2016 that just caused suddenly all these people started coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah. But anyway,
we all know what happened.
It'd been building for a while.
No, it had. It was. The door was opened.
Yeah, the door was open. But yeah, so essentially folkism is that idea, and it uses a lot of Nazi things, and it's especially prevalent in Norse heathenry. It's in other aspects of heathenry, but it's very prevalent. In fact, there's a group that is the loudest. It's not the only group, but it's the loudest, called the AFA, or the Also True Folk Assembly, where they are incredibly racist. They're even making their own homeschool thing to indoctrinate children into racism. That's a whole thing.
That's I mean, that's really. I mean, though to be fair, I don't think the religion part of it needs to be saddled with that response. Like that's clearly that is what I was talking about before. How a religion is used to mold a society, but that's like where they're like, let's not even hide it. let's literally just say that's what we're doing.
Well, and the thing is, that would be great, but they use the religion with it. For example, Stephen McNally, the founder of the AFA, he has several videos out where he's like talking about, Wotanism. We need to bring back Wotanism, and then immediately says, I'm going to talk about race and a race war.
Yeah.
And things
no,
like that.
and I'm aware that wasn't there.
So that's what I'm saying. So unfortunately, it's actually the opposite. So whereas as I've shown, the ancient Scandinavians, they actually would go out and trade. In fact, there's a paper that I meant to bring up that I guess lost in translation somewhere in my whole thing, where there's a paper where they found a cloth from the Muslim kingdom.
I'm being recorded. Sorry, my kid's right here.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
I'm being recorded, and I stuck my tongue out at my kid. I just realized it's like I shouldn't have done that.
Oh yeah. But they essentially found in a burial a cloth with pseudo Kufic on it in Viking context. So Kufic is the writing that you see, like Arabic writing and things like that. And then they also found a ring with a stone in it, and it has pseudo Kufic in it. They originally thought said Allah, but now it's been determined to be gibberish. But what that shows is they look close enough to what Kufic is. The running theory is that because at the time in the Western world, the Muslim kingdoms like the Abbasid Caliphate and the Umayyads in Spain and things like that were the most wealthy and advanced kingdoms. Like this is where most of the scientific advancements in the Western world were made until the coming of the Renaissance and such. That the Norse used pseudo-Kufic to sort of show how wealthy they were. They're like, look, I've been to this nice place.
Right. But they didn't know what they were writing. They just copied the images as best they could.
But you wouldn't do that if you were xenophobic. You wouldn't wear. So that's sort of.
It's like when people get stuff with Japanese writing on it, and if you can read kanji, you're like, you know that says like General Tso's chicken.
Yeah, or something like that. Yeah. So essentially, so it's essentially the opposite. So in the medieval era, they were very willing to go out and trade and intermarry with these people and live with them. In that modern era, unfortunately, heathenry, not all heathenry, but unfortunately, a good chunk of modern heathenry is very problematic, very toxic, and very racist. And we are fighting it. In fact, not my first video, but my second video is titled "Is Folkism Valid? The Archaeological Evidence," where I break down point by point why being xenophobic is not historical to the Norse. So things like that. So yes, we are calling them out, and we are calling out popular culture. Though, to be fair,
well, my point wasn't. See here, and I'm going to tell you what I was prepared to say.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it. It's what I was prepared to say.
Yeah.
To make the distinction, because my feeling was now keep in mind I made a video, and for those who are seeing this, I have a very large following on TikTok. Yeah. I made the video. The first video has, I think, now about 150,000 views. Yeah. It has about 3,000 comments, which is when I asked you, have you read all the comments? And you said yes. I was like, you didn't read all the comments.
I went through all 3 videos and read them all. Last time I read them.
I mean, there's 3,000 comments, but I was like, yeah. And most of them are just people saying garbage stuff.
Well, yeah,
we're obvious garbage stuff. So it's hard. And I don't know. But my point is, I was gonna say, how come when the MCU says these fallacies about Norse faith, I'm not seeing that kind of pushback? And how come when others, and my argument is, it's because they say it's cool. They're saying it's a good thing, where I took the same information and I said, no, I see this as a horrible thing. And so I would say, I really recommend, as a person who's not invested in this, push back on the people saying your faith is good, but saying it the wrong way. And maybe you're doing it, I just don't see it because you don't have the audience I have. Because, I mean, why would a million people who don't follow Norse faith? You see what I'm saying? But no, I absolutely will. I do have to wrap things up. But
we'll wrap things up real quick. But one thing I wanted to say, and the thing with Thor, and one thing in the comics, they do have that hell as being a place where everyone goes, and Valhalla being the only where people who go to battle. And the MCU has now turned it into the whole popular culture.
And my point is, it goes beyond. I mean, even like I said, Wagner gave the same portrayal of this faith, la 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 la. I mean, it's great stuff.
Yeah,
it's
that's the neo-Nazi racism thing that comes in, which is a whole thing. I actually got a video on, but what I was gonna say, but the thing with the Thor in the comics is important to note. This happened unintentionally because the main writers of the Thor comics were Jewish Americans: Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby, in fact, even went to war and went to World War II and was a cartographer and things like that. And so they wrote Thor and turned him blonde and blue-eyed. And so while they were just writing a cool story, they unintentionally imparted this whole idea of blonde hair, blue-eyed stuff that's followed by the neo-Nazis. Important to note, now somebody did leave this comment on that video about Thor that I made this distinction. No. Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and Stan Lee were not Nazis. They did not do this intentionally. They just drew a character. But regardless of whether or not they had the intention of doing so, they still did it, and we were living with these after effects in the modern life, which is what happened when people like Ben, who aren't academics or Norse heathen, they see it, and so that's the big issue. And so one, we have to push back against, but two, we also have to remember that the Thor in Thor comics, the only thing is he's blonde hair, blue eyed, and he fights evil. So we can, push back and say, hey, that's not accurate. But at the same time, it's important to note it is also modern mythology, and mythology did evolve over the years. In fact, at one point, Thor and Hercules were thought to be were syncretized by the Germanic tribes in Rome as the same deity. So things like that. So we can just say, well, yeah, it's not accurate to the original mythology, but we can accept it because it's a good story and it has good messages. So that's another important thing to bring up too.
That's something I was going to point out earlier when you were making your point, was we don't get all up in arms when it's fiction. It's when people try to pass it off as if it's accurate.
Yeah,
when it's just
that's a fair point. A very fair point.
We'll point it out, but we're not going to get angry about it.
However, something like the Vikings TV series or things like that are, shown as supposed to be historically accurate to some degree, that's when we get up in arms, because it's a quote unquote based on a true story, but more often than not, based on a true story means jack and shit.
No. I was a writer for many years. I wrote screenplays, and based on a true story means nothing more than you legally. It means nothing more than you have the right to put based on a true story in the front. What was it? I think there was like one of the Hot Shots movie. I don't know if you know. That's like similarly the equivalent of like that's incredibly goofy humor, and they put based on a true story in the front.
Yeah. Well, and, or like for example, the Patriot movie, Mel Gibson's The Patriot. He got an actual Revolutionary War historian to come out, but then ignored all of his advice.
Yeah,
so
because the fact is they gotta sell tickets, and
they said we have an actual historian here, and we ignored it. In fact, funny anecdote: the guy who played the villain in Patriot actually kept asking. He's British, and he kept asking the Revolutionary War historian, like, "Did this actually happen? Did this actually happen? Yada yada yada." And he kept being told, "No, it didn't happen like that." And he's like, "Well, why are you here?" And the historian said, "Well, I imagine so they can say that they have a historian here."
Yeah. Actually, if you ever watch, there's a movie with Alan Alda called Sweet Liberty.
Yeah.
I recommend it. Just for it's I'm not even going to tell you what it's about because that's just a waste of time.
Yeah, it's a waste of time. But so that's something we do push back on.
Okay. Like Vikings, well, good.
Or like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which again, the Assassin's Creed game were, for the most part, historically accurate as they could get them until Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So anyways,
all right. Well, I will definitely lend my voice to say correctly. I'm not sure. I may do it. I have a lot going on tomorrow, and I definitely don't have the energy to do it now. But absolutely send me the information so that I can share how people can watch this.
Yeah.
And I'll try to guide people to your channel.
Yeah, that's fine, and that's fine. All right. Well, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for educating me.
Thank you for being very receptive to these corrections. Because again, they're kind of misconceptions, and unfortunately, things like Vikings TV series and Marvel, to a certain degree, have perpetuated, as well as the racist factions of Norse paganism and heathenry ever. So,
well, I definitely was going into that video with the awareness that there were a lot of white supremacists that love the imagery of the Nordic whole thing, and I was aware. My kid wrote a paper about the Aryans and how, like, Hitler just straight up had it wrong, like literally, like referring to the wrong group of people.
Yeah.
And that's been hung on. They were telling me, they're like, yeah, the Aryans were not white.
No, they were. That's a little more complicated than that, because that's actually the Indo-Europeans. They're offshoot of the Indo-Europeans, and that's one of the things I'm going to graduate school for.
Do you want to be on camera? Come here. Come here. My dog wants to say hi. Come here.
Yeah,
Come here. Come on up. Come on. There you go. Okay, say hi. Say hi there.
But it's a little more. Indo-Europeans are a complicated thing.
Oh, no, that's it. We're finished.
Yeah.
That was it. You were just going to say hi, and then you're going to have to go away.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Well, but so there you go. Well, I hope you have a good night. Thank you again for being receptive to these.
Thank you.
And I'll let you send the video link to the video once it's uploaded tonight.
Yeah.